Hi everybody, I see it's 10 o'clock. Welcome to everybody. I know my name is Ros Nideffer and I'm a former professional tennis player. I know we have probably a lot of people here from last week and probably some new people as well. So I'm going to give a brief summary of what we did last week, and then I'm hoping this will be an opportunity for all of us to interact and, ask questions, share information. This webinar, the title of it is how to motivate athletes during this time of the pandemic. And as I said last week, I'm certainly no expert at this. None of us have experienced this kind of pandemic before. So I think none of us are really experts. So I want to encourage you all to share your experiences, and hopefully we'll get a nice dialogue going. So after I've done a brief summary of what we talked about last week, then we'll move into hopefully a good time of sharing. As I said, my name is Ros Nideffer. I played on the Pro Tour. Actually, let me share the screen. Yeah, I hope that's good. So I played on the Pro Tour from about 1978 to 1997, and I was my highest ranking in singles was number 15 in the world. That was about the late 80s and the early 90s. I achieved that ranking twice. And in the early 80s was number 2 doubles team in the world with 2 different partners. I've played everybody from Yvonne Goolagong, Billie Jean King, Pam Shriver, Martina Navratilova, Chris Evert, all the way up to even playing Venus Williams when she was just starting to play. So had a very long career, was very fortunate from that perspective. Was able to do what I really loved and earn a living doing that. So I feel very grateful. So as I said, I'm an athlete. I'm not an expert in sports psychology. So that's why I'm hoping that you can all participate and help me out and keep this discussion going. For some reason, I'm having trouble seeing everybody here. I don't know what's going on. But anyway, I'll try to proceed without that. Before I go any further, I'd like to thank Dr. Christina Vasari and all her team at SDUIS for hosting this, this webinar and promoting it. It's a great idea during this pandemic time, just to keep people connected and to help us all, share information and come up with new ideas to improve our performance. So here, I have to share here, right, there you go. So this is a summary of last week's discussion. We talked about, this being a good time to evaluate your goals and perhaps modify them, figure out how you want to be prepared when things do get back to normal. It's also a great time to enjoy your family, make sure that you have, things in the right perspective. Athletes have a tendency to feel like their sport is the be all and end of everything. And it's really difficult for us to keep things in perspective. So just recognizing, you're enjoying your family, and just recognizing that, the sport is just a small part of who you are. And if you're able to do that, it'll obviously be able to help you control your pressure once you get on the court, because when you have things in the right perspective, you obviously perform better. It's also an opportunity to stay in shape. If you can't get on the tennis court or on your court of, the sport that you perform, you can do other things. We talked about a lot of different things last week: running, jumping rope, lifting weights, yeah, there are lots of things, biking. You know, many people think this is a great time to get ahead of the competition, and surely it is. The things you have to consider and be concerned about is burning out. You know, we really don't know when things are going to open up completely, when tournaments are going to begin again, and you don't want to work so hard now that you burn yourself out. And you know, you're exhausted both mentally and physically by the time you're able to compete. The other thing I didn't mention last week that I found really, really useful was hitting against the wall. When I was young, I spent hours and hours hitting against a wall, and it's just really helpful for keeping your muscle memory there. It's good for fitness. It's just really helpful, just to keep your hand-eye coordination sharp. We also talked about mental strategies. We talked about watching videos of yourself, watching videos of other people. And then a big part of the discussion was visualization. And I hope that today we will get a little bit deeper into that, and some of you will be able to share your thoughts and feelings about this, because there are a number of ways to engage in visualization. There's, you know, you can visualize yourself performing as an outsider, as a spectator would view you. Or there's the kinesthetic visualization, where you're actually within your own body. So you're not seeing yourself from the outside, but you're feeling your muscles move, and you're feeling that your body weight transfer, you're feeling the racket or the club or whatever it is in your hand. So I think, you know, we can talk about that further, and I'd be interested to hear what all of you have to share. I talked about a few things that I find helpful: visual images, keeping your mind like water. It's just having control of your emotions, like a lake that's very calm, and that can be contrasted with when somebody throws a stone in the lake, and then you see all the ripple effect of how, for example, emotions or something that might happen externally can trigger you and cause you to emotionally react. And if you think about keeping your mind like water, then you're more able to control your emotions. And then something that I love is using soft eyes and soft hands. And that's, you know, soft eyes for me is having an external, calm, outward focus. And so I'm seeing everything very clearly. I'm seeing everything around me. And you're not able to be in that mode of concentration if you're anxious. So it's so that's very helpful. And soft hands goes along in the same sort of manner, because when I have soft hands, I'm not anxious. I'm not gripping my racket too tight. I'm able to feel the ball on my racket. And it's just a good visual cue for me when I'm feeling anxious, or you know, I'm not feeling the ball. Then I try to go back to that. The other thing we talked about was a triangle. You know, I showed an image of a triangle on its base, on the flat side, and then contrasted that with a triangle that's on its point, and talked about how when you're calm and relaxed and feeling confident, you are performing as though you're on the base of the triangle. The base of the triangle is solid. You're not anxious. Your breathing is controlled, and your center of mass is, you know, in the right place. Whereas if you're like a triangle on its point, you're easily, you know, you tip very easily. You're anxious. Your breathing is high up in your chest, and you just don't feel balanced and secure. I also tried to go into the 4 types of concentration, which is my husband's, you may know my husband's was one of the founders of sports psychology, and he developed the 4 types of concentration. And I like that because it Well, I'll go back. When I first started, my husband first came on the tour with me as a sports psychologist. I was one of the first tennis players to travel with a psychologist, and many of my other competitors, I think, were, you know, they looked at him very suspiciously. You know, they didn't know what he was there for. They didn't really understand sports psychology. This was back in the early 80s or early to mid 80s. Sports psychology wasn't, you know, really popular back then. And many of my opponents, I think, felt when I played against them, they felt that my husband, Bob, was there to help me psych them out. And, you know, so the reason I bring that up is because, you know, my question is, what is sports psychology? You know, and for me, it was, when Bob started working with me, it gave me a better understanding of myself and who I am. And he developed a test. You may know about the test of attentional and interpersonal styles. And having taken the test a number of times, I learned that my greatest strength was my ability to analyze. And so the test was very helpful because Bob's expertise is in concentration. And so I was able to then recognize that when I got in a stressful situation, I relied on my greatest strength, which was my broad internal. So I was analyzing, and what I recognize is your greatest strength is usually your greatest weakness as well. So under pressure, I relied on my ability to analyze, and you know, that is, as most of you know, is probably not a good thing, because when you're performing in the zone, you want to be focused externally. You want to not be thinking inside of yourself. You want to be seeing what's going on around you and just reacting. So just understanding the 4 different concentration styles was really helpful for me. So here they are. So as I was saying, my strength is being analytical, which is this bottom left-hand quadrant, which is the broad internal. And you know, I'm very good at problem solving, thinking about analyzing my opponents, analyzing myself, but I do get trapped in that, you know, in that situation when the pressure's on. And the other thing that working with a psychologist sort of helped me recognize was soon before I started working with Bob, my dad had died. He died when I was 19 or so. I started working with Bob when I think I was 24. And what I didn't realize, and Bob helped me realize, was that I was actually playing, in my very early years, I was playing for my father's love. And my father was very, he was a perfectionist and was very critical of me. And so I wanted to please him. And so in my early years, especially in my junior days, I was, you know, I didn't realize it, but I was competing for his love. And I think it's very important for athletes to be aware of why they are competing, you know, who they're competing for. They keep competing for a coach, you know, are they competing for, you know, recognition, you know, what is it? What drives them? And I think once you know that, I think it really helps you to move you to a different place. And I recognize that at that point, I recognized that I actually had to be competing for myself. And so it made me realize that I had to actually love what I was doing. And certainly I did, because I had a very long career and I've continued to play senior tournaments. And I think that is a testament to the fact that I really love what I'm doing. And the other thing, you know, what sports psychology was for me was I was able to introduce the element of visualization into my performance, because before that I probably was doing it without realizing it, because as I said last week, I'm a visual learner, so I was using videos, but I think it became much more clear to me how important visualization is. And an example of that I can use from a match that I played a match in San Diego on the Pro Tour, and one of my friends came to watch me play, and she hadn't seen me play very much, and she happened to take a video of my performance and just a small portion of it. And after the match, I managed to win. It was a first round match. I won the match, and then she showed me the video, and I was in shock because I looked awful. And specifically, it was my forehand. And in the match, I hadn't been able to really, my forehand is my strength, and I hadn't been able to really use that strength as well as I should have been. And by looking at the video that she had taken, it gave me this visual image of what I had been doing poorly, and allowed me to correct that, mentally. And when I went into play my next match, I played so much better because I was now aware of what I actually was doing. Because I think, as you all know, when you're under pressure, your feet stop moving, you get, your muscles get tense, you don't move, you don't turn. And so just having that video reminder really helped me get out of my just my lack of awareness. Really, it was a lack of awareness of what my body was doing, so lack of kinesthetic awareness. And another thing that's been very helpful for me over the past, early on in my career, somebody took a photograph of me in a tournament in England where I was playing on grass, which is my favorite surface, and I was playing really well. And the picture was of my hair flying as I was moving forward to hit a volley. So I was, sideways, my hair was flying back. And, I can't tell you how many times I referred back to that visual image of that photograph of my hair flying when I'm having problems with my volleys, because what I'm able to then do is just put this visual image of my hair flying, and it automatically forces me to turn sideways, to move forward to the ball, to move quickly forward to the ball, and then really hit it out in front. So, that's all to say that, just how effective visualization can be, and how videos and photographs can be used for that purpose. So, I'd like to open it up to ask if there are any questions. I should add, I'm having a little problem with my screen here. I'm not able to see everybody. So it would be great if you could, ask some questions while I try to figure this problem out. I'm sure there's some experts out there much more knowledgeable than I, who can, get a discussion going. Don't be shy.
Yeah, hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, hi, I finally figured out my problem too, so that's great. Hi, Ben.
Yeah, nice to see you. Thank you for sharing so much. It's really great.
You're welcome.
Let's see, a couple things. One, on visualization, are there really three facets of it, where it's external, seeing yourself like a video of yourself, internal, where you're seeing from the inside out, and a third being kinesthetic, where you're focusing more on the feel? Or is internal and kinesthetic the same thing?
That's an interesting question. I had that discussion with Bob the other day, and I think we sort of disagreed a little bit. So I don't know that there's really a good answer to that. What does everybody else think? I mean, for me, when I'm visualizing from the inside, it's actually a kinesthetic, it's a feeling only thing, I think. what does everybody else think? Has anybody else had experience of that? Don't be shy, just speak up.
I've heard it mentioned 3 different ways, but that doesn't mean that's right. But I've heard another sports psychologist refer to it, at least I thought that that's what this person meant, was external, internal, and kinesthetic. But I can see some blended lines between the internal view, seeing yourself from the inside out, and kinesthetically. So that's why I'm
can you
still
describe how would you differentiate that? Seeing yourself from the inside and feeling yourself from the inside.
Just that. Just seeing yourself from the inside is being internal, and kinesthetic, feeling yourself from the inside. That's how I would distinguish between the two, but I don't know if that's right.
It's a difficult one. I try to visualize that now, and I can't really. If I'm inside myself, I don't think I can really see myself, but I can certainly feel myself, and that to me is huge because
Okay. So you kind of see it as one and the same. The internal is the.
I think I do, yes. But
okay.
as I say, I'm not an expert, so I'd love to hear from other people who have different views. Everybody seems shy.
I have another question, but I want us to be able to finish this one first. So if other people or yourself have anything to add, that's great. Looks like somebody else does.
Yeah.
Sandra?
Go ahead.
Oh, okay. Hi, I'm Sandra. I just wrote the message in. You hear by my accent, I talk similar to you.
Yes, I hear that.
But it's not because of me, it's more because of my husband. We've lived in South Africa for over 10 years while my husband was still playing soccer professionally. And we now work with a lot of younger athletes. We live in Switzerland now. We deal with a lot of soccer players, but me having been a former tennis player as well for Switzerland, I also went on scholarship to America to play tennis. We also deal with a lot of tennis players. And I have been finding it helpful to show them what you said before. When you saw the video of yourself, you were shocked in a way first what you were looking like, or how it was when you played your match. And I found that to show them both, it needs both, that they can start seeing the inner self as well and seeing themselves. They need that comparison to learn, what do I look like when I do something, and does it match the image I have of myself or does it not? And most of them the first time are very shocked, even if we do some practice videos, and I do find it underused, the use of video, just to learn also the feeling about it, to learn how to hit a serve. Are you hitting it in the top spot? Yeah. Are you hitting it in, when I tell you, hit the ball higher, or if you don't know what it looks like and you haven't seen it, then it's difficult for you to visualize. And then if I give you a task and say afterwards, before a match, just visualize how you hit your perfect shot. If you haven't seen it and you can't compare the picture of what you've seen to what you see internally, then it's becoming, I find, quite impossible for a lot of, especially the younger players, to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so do you think, I totally agree with you, it's important to be able to see, visually, outwardly, but that's, when you're watching a video, that's like watching as a spectator. Mm-hmm. And I think what Ben was trying to say was, given what you said, Sandra, do you think the visual image of having seen yourself before then gets created within you, so that you when you're visualizing from within, that picture's still in your mind? I mean, because when I visualize from within, so not as a spectator of myself, I'm just feeling it. But I mean, I may be wrong. I may be also reflecting on an image that I've seen before as well.
I think, don't we often also say, look, or we use other examples and we say, see how early Roger Federer takes the ball after the bounce, how early he hits it. And if I tell somebody, you're too late, take the ball earlier, if they don't know, if they can't compare their own inner image to make the correction, and they haven't seen what it looks like. They know what Roger looks like because that they've seen on TV, so that they got the outside perspective. But if they haven't learned that same perspective about themselves, I find it very difficult to make that change within yourself. But if you know what your own motion looks like, and then you're asked to make a change, I find you can maybe make a correction in your visualization to go see and understand, okay, I actually need to visualize as it comes up, and that's what I look like, and I hit it quicker, and then compare yourself maybe even to the image used. If it's Roger, if it's Serena, it doesn't matter. But what you've seen, you have to know it. And there I find just to say or only use the visualization from within yourself can create more mistakes because you actually don't know what it looks like.
Yeah. I think what I hear you saying is you have to be able to be aware of your body in relation to the ball and your racket or your club or whatever it is.
In a way that you were talking about. But if you don't see it, you can't see. I find you can't see it with your inner eye. They work together. You're bombarded with external images, obviously, to what it's meant to look like or what it looks like in others. And you see your opponent, what it looks like. And if you don't have that chance to see it or that understanding what it looks in your own, like how others even see you or what it looks when you yourself do it, then it's going to be very difficult to make that change within yourself, more like for correctional purposes. But we want that they have a good, or that they have the most possible improvement they can have, isn't it? We're not all having Rogers to work with from the beginning.
Yeah. I mean, are there any other thoughts or ideas on that? I mean, I think it's a fascinating topic. For me, it's just the feeling is very critical, and feeling where my body is in relation to the ball and everything else, my footwork, and my feeling my body weight and my center of mass. I think that really helps me. And the other thing we talked about the other day, I think last week, was just how important that is to do it in real time. Mm-hmm. And, it's important for athletes to have practiced visualization. It's no good coming to a big match and just saying, oh, I'm stressed out, I need to try to visualize. If you haven't done it under a non-stressful situation and practiced it over and over again, it's going to be really difficult to do it right before a very important competition, because you're going to be anxious. It's going to be speeded up. You're not going to be able to keep it in the real time that it needs to be for you to really have the benefit of it. Is that making sense?
I agree. And the tournament or the match is where you have to deliver, right? So you have to take a step back if you want to make players better. Where do you do that? You do that in practice. You spend 90% of your time probably in practice. So that would be where you need to practice that, and where you need to have more of those tools in place to do that you can just deliver in a match and don't have to think about it and have all these thought processes in a match to go, okay, do I see myself, how I do this? Must I make corrections? It's too late for that. It's the match. Yeah. You're meant to play. So that's why I find sometimes a bit underused in the training environment, that you use a lot more of those tools that are available to you to make somebody aware. How does the feeling of what you look like, your kinesthetic feeling, your feeling of your positioning, of how the timing of the ball is, and doesn't only apply to tennis. The practice is the time to practice that, right? That's why it's called practice. Yeah. So you have to do it there, and then hopefully have that image by the match where you don't have to think about it anymore.
Right. Does anybody else have any suggestions or comments on that? Yeah, go ahead, Ben.
Oh, okay. Just from listening to you and the discussion there, I'm going to say I think it's going to be a lot easier and simplistic if you think of it as two different perspectives, not three. One external, and I think you made a comment about on the internal, aren't you going to start to naturally start to see yourself a little bit? I think you said that. I think the internal and kinesthetic is the other perspective, rather than trying to turn it into three. If you can see yourself from the inside, looking out and work on the feel, the kinesthetic feel, that internal and kinesthetic are pretty much one and the same, and it'll be a lot easier to simplify it that way. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I think you're right. But as you were talking, I just remembered what Bob had said to me when we were having this discussion before. Is he talks about, you know, when you've got your eyes, well, you can do it with your eyes closed or your eyes open. But if you're doing it from an internal point of view, you may still have external cues. For example, you may sort of visualize a ball coming towards you, which is obviously external. And then you go back internally to visualize, how you would position yourself around that ball. And he actually gave the example of, say, a basketball player, and how when he was in school, he would be walking down the corridor in school and visualize himself, dribbling between the people, the kids walking down the corridor. And, also he described sitting in a classroom where he might be, sitting at his desk and have his hand under the desk, sort of just actually moving his hand, but visualizing dribbling as well. So I think they can be combined.
Yeah, it's interesting. I remember actually listening to the webinar where he mentioned that.
Oh, did he mention it?
He did. Hey, one other thing on that, you said about visualizing in real time. I agree with you. And certainly as you get close to the match, like before the match, I think real time would be better. But I think there is a place for visualizing in slow motion, like particularly when you're learning a serve or learning a skill. You might break it into chunks or see it in slow motion to try and learn technically more about what you're doing. But as far as it getting close to the game time, then real time I would think would be better. Those are my thoughts. What do you think?
I think you're spot on. I think that's actually excellent advice, because what I was doing actually the other day, I was trying to figure out something with my own game, and I was watching a video of somebody playing, and I actually slowed down the video and broke it down, and that way you can visualize, just portions of it, and then put it together. So I think that's, both watching videos and with your own internal kinesthetic process. I think it's good to slow it down in the early learning stages when you're learning it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Which brings me to a question I got during the week, as somebody was asking me about, how do you help somebody who is not really into doing drills, not into, they just want to play practice matches and don't want to actually take the time to practice things over and over again. And it brings up the idea of overlearning. I don't know if, I'm sure you're all familiar with overlearning. And it goes back to your point earlier, Ben, about, breaking things down. So in the early stages, when you're learning a new skill, is you want to repeat it over and over and over again, whether that's visually, mentally, or actually out on the court executing the shot. Because what overlearning does is it helps you to get to the place where you can do perform the task automatically. And what that avoids is what we were talking about last week with the concentration styles, is when you're in the zone, you're mostly focused externally. So you're focused broad external, you're paying attention to everything that's going on the other side of the court or around you. And then there's the broad internal, where when the ball comes to your side of the court, you're actually executing. And when when you're in the stage of just learning a new shot or a new task, it's not automatic. So often you're giving yourself cues, you know, there's self-talk, you know, you might be telling yourself, you know, bend your knees or turn your racket face this way. I mean, there are tons of cues you could be giving yourself, but also that serves as a distraction, and it causes you to go internally. So instead of having the external, broad external or narrow external, you now have an internal focus, because you're trying to either visualize or recall information about what you've been working on with this new shot. And until it becomes automatic, you're going to be doing that. So you're going to be shifting concentration more often. So the more you can perfect a skill and make it automatic, the less you're going to be having that movement from external to internal concentration. And I think you'll, for those of you who were on last week, I talked about how your brain and your eyes can be like a camera taking photographs. But as soon as you go internally, the camera kind of stops and you don't have as many pictures. And so the process seems speeded up, because you don't have, when you're totally focused externally, you have lots of pictures. You're taking pictures all the time. But as soon as you go internally, the camera kind of stops. And so that causes things to feel like they're speeded up. And so when you're learning a new skill, if you haven't made it, you know, perfected it, nobody's perfect, but if you haven't practiced it so that it's automatic, you're going to be shifting in and out of concentration, and it's going to be less likely that you're going to play in the zone or play at your best. Comments, questions? You can disagree with me too.
Rosalind, can you hear me?
Yeah, Dave, you're very faint.
Okay, I don't know if it's my microphone or what. Is this any better?
A little bit better. Does everybody else hear him? You can nod.
Let me see if I can turn up the speakers. First of all, I want to thank you, particularly for the part of sharing when you were a player and Bob was there, and you know, and just how you utilize Bob's skills to integrate it into your skills. And I wish the answer to Ben and what you're commenting on kinesthetic was all this simple, because every person is different and depends on the context that you're teaching and working, and even if the person's responsive to learning the imagery skills. But to keep it simple, I think a lot of it is like movement related. And I remember Terry Orlick years ago, and you talk about in visualization, a lot of people don't get it until like a canoeer. You get them in the boat and you're just kind of like mimicking kind of the motions, and until you get a feel for it. And when I was listening to you talk about Ben's question and the kinesthetic sense, I thought, well, you know, I think a lot of really elite athletes use kind of a kinesthetic sense to get the feel of what they're trying to do, whether it's moving their feet and seeing the ball or shifting their attention. But the more you can kind of shadow tennis or shadow feel what you're trying to incorporate in your visualization, then when you actually are getting into a performance setting, it's a little bit more layered and complex, and allows the athlete maybe to be more instinctive in the way they're making decisions and reacting to the ball. So I'm not sure it's perfect real time. Everybody's got to be different in how skilled they are, but I think it's a combination of the mental skills of mindfulness, being present, understanding yourself. If you're kind of like losing your concentration, what do you do? Is it because of the internal chatter, or is it because of external? I'm not really seeing the cues well or the ball well, but how can I really feel performing with confidence and staying in the point for as long as I can? So my point really is kind of like the shadow tennis or the mimicking the motions while imaging.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think Ben brought that up last week when he talked about, you know, really having the, feel the ball, having the racket in your hand and actually doing shadow tennis.
Mm-hmm.
Right. You talked about that last week. And I think that is very helpful. I think to actually go through the motions physically is very helpful. I think all those things put together are a great way to work on your game now, when you can't get out and actually get out on the court.
Sorry, I turned myself back on because there's actually at Swiss Tennis at the moment, we got something that's called the Swiss Tennis High School, and it's mainly also supported by Roger Federer, and I suppose his whole foundation is a bit integrated in it, but there they actually do very much suggest at the very lowest level, when they start first learning tennis, that if you work with a group of children, that you have them line them up, that they're behind each other. The first child in the front is physically hitting the ball, but the ones behind them, if you got 4 or 5 behind them, they're shadowing the movement that the first one is doing. So they're meant to position with him. If he's got to move left or right for the ball, they're meant to mirror or shadow what he is doing, to also learn or pay attention to the ball, even though they're not physically getting a turn. And I think that is sort of the idea behind it, that they learn a bit already, positioning, feeling of the ball, trying to get their feeling, what it looks like, where they're meant to be. And I find it always, it's nice to watch. And you have to, not all the kids do it well, but they also respond to it quite well. At first, when I saw it, thought, oh, how boring for the kids behind, but they actually enjoy it. And
yeah, I think that's a great idea. It's a great idea. It reminds me of, it's a little bit different, but it reminds me when I was really young, one of the best pieces of advice I got was, when you're in a coaching setting and the coach is correcting or helping somebody else, it's really good for you to be listening to what the coach is telling the other person, because you can learn from that as well. Because many of the kids are, if the coach is not talking to them, they're just, playing around, fooling around. But I think you can learn so much from, what a coach is telling somebody else. Anything else?
Hi, this is Alan Xu. I'm a sports psychology professor and also certified mental performance consultant. I just want to piggyback on what Dave mentioned. It's really depending on the goal of the visualization or mental imagery, we usually call them, because it's not just visual, right? It's also auditory, like the taste, the smell, kinesthetic, all those senses. I sent an article about the Pet Lab model that some of you probably have seen it already, about the internal, external perspective. But what I want to add is that, when we have visualization, it can be for different type of performances, could be for physical, technical, tactical, psychological, right? So I think what Sandra mentioned was right. If someone is learning as a beginner, based on the research that I saw, is that if you see it more as an external or third person perspective, and in a more slow motion rather than in real time, then that may be more conducive. But like Rosalind, like you as a professional player, if you visualize for a match, for performance, for actually compete, it's better to be real time, internal perspective. And that's also better for psychological as well. When you want to feel, let's say if it's induced, your last set, you want to be able to feel you are doing it internally. You are feeling maybe some butterfly or sweating. It's a little bit better to have that internal perspective. But what I want to emphasize is that depending on the goal, we use different visualization from different perspectives, different timing. But also we really need to look at the research, because what we do is using a scientific or scientist practitioner model. What I see a lot in our field is that people like to think about what works, but they don't look at the research or the science or the theory behind it. And I just want to advocate that we really need to look at the research in a specific context. In tennis, it may be different than soccer, for example. So I think when we use some of the method to train ourselves or train other people, we really need to look at the science and the research behind it. But generally, from what I have seen, internal seem to work better for tactics for higher level performers. External seems to work a little bit better for beginners. Seeing them doing like a successful shot, breaking down the technique and things like that, just generally. But I encourage everybody to do research.
Yeah, that makes sense, because a young beginner wouldn't really have the visual, if they're just starting, they won't have the visual images of what it's supposed to look like yet. So it's in that situation, it's much more important to give them the words, explain to them what they need to do. So, and the other thing that that you said that I felt, reminded me of something is you mentioned the auditory and how that can be helpful. And it reminded me of a situation where I had been struggling a little bit, hadn't been playing very well. And I had an old racket in my racket bag, and I picked it up and I started, using it, started hitting with it. And the strings were really loose, and they'd probably been in there a long time, and I hadn't used the racket in a while. But I started just playing unbelievably well. And, I went home and I told my husband, wow, I've solved my problem. I need to loosen my racket strings. And he said, oh, I knew, he said, oh, that's great. But I knew he knew that, it wasn't really a long-term solution. But I believed it was a long-term solution. So he left me to believe that that was a long-term solution. But what was actually happening was that because the racket strings were looser, I was paying attention to the sound of the ball on my racket. And that sound of the ball was bringing me outside of my head, getting me focused externally. And I was actually able to feel the racket. So I think the auditory thing in that example is kind of useful. Bob and I laugh about it now because, occasionally he'll say to me, well, if I'm struggling, he'll say, well, go and restring your racket looser. Because there are some, there are magical things that, I say magical, I suppose that in some ways they are magical because they're not long-term solutions, but that's, an example that a coach can use, because if the player actually believes in the coach can actually tell the player anything that sort of makes sense, and in order to get the player out of their head. So, Bob can give me some advice that's, is maybe not the greatest, but if I believe in it, it can help pull me out of a funk that I'm in, if that's the case. I have if nobody has anything else they want to comment on that, I have an interesting story. You want to go ahead, Ben?
Yeah, okay. Hey, I really like what Alan's saying, and Dave as well. I just want to get clarification on the internal focus. Alan mentioned it is better for tactics and strategy. And is it all, did I hear it correctly that also when you're working on technical, it's the internal or kinesthetic is better for more advanced players?
Yes, that's what I mentioned. Research shows that for advanced players, it's better to use real time and also an internal perspective because they already know how to do that properly. I'm sure Rosalind doesn't need to think about, okay, I got to swing my racket to the back, I need to swing this side, this angle. It's all automatic. So what they want to do is more like the feel of doing it, or even better, maybe even visualizing maybe the speed or the spin, the depth of the ball, to kind of do different type of forehand, backhand shot. So I played table tennis pretty competitively, not tennis, but the one on the table.
Yeah.
Sometimes you guys call ping pong, but we call it table tennis because we don't do it in the basement. It's a legitimate Olympic sport. But that's why I personally do as well with an internal perspective, because I would say I've been playing a lot since I was 5, and I don't need to think about how to do my forehand, how to do my backhand, but it's more like the feel of doing it. So internal perspective is a little bit better that way. And auditory, I use it a lot for sure with the ping pong sound, and you may not think about it, but like different pitch of those shots actually help me know how fast, how slow the ball goes, or the spin of the ball to help me hit the shot accurately. So the auditory piece is pretty important, particularly for my sport.
Yeah, that's
include the auditory cues as well.
Yep.
Nice.
Yeah,
I got
that's
one other question.
Go ahead.
It has to do with getting back to the 4 concentration styles. And I know you may have gone over it in another session, but you talk about the broad external for tennis players, especially when they're playing the point, and that I think you said more for broad internal for cues and learning a certain skill. I think that's what you said. I wanted to get clarification on that. And also, what about the 2 other quadrants? When do they apply? The narrow external and narrow internal?
Yeah, can you